I watched Virat Kohli, got out the first innings the other day of the last test. He missed a full toss from Mitchell Santner. I mean, you could just see as he walked off, he was thinking in his head what I've just said. I've just missed a full toss from Mitchell Santner. How am I going? You know, it was just, and he's not the Kohli we remember. I reckon he's played so much cricket in all forms of the game. Yes, he's still got that fundamentally gorgeous technique, but up here, he's exhausted, much like Smith. They've just been ground down. They're so similar in a way, but I will say this. I just feel there's a part of Kohli deep in his heart here that gets right up when he comes to Australia. It just, even last time when he had to leave the tour, he was looking gorgeous in Adelaide before he got run out. And that was, he could have done anything that innings. I just think Australia spurs him and steals him. And whatever he's got, he'll slap it on the table here. But bowlers no longer fear him. And that is beyond question. Like he used to be, the absolute talisman. He's no longer that. And Smith, he averaged 30 in Test this year, 42 last year, and is the same. His retreat down the order says a lot about his state of mind. He wanted to open the batting, and now he wanted to go back down to 4. For the first time in a long time, he's uncertain about himself, and he's just feeling his age. I remember Kerry O'Keefe on the back page of Fox Sports 6 or so years ago when Smith was in his absolute prime. He said, I love him as a player, but he's an eye player. And when eye players decline, they go quickly. So he said that'll be the watch on Steve late in his career. When his eye starts to go, he will go quickly. So, yep, there's a watch on him this summer.
And Dan, we were at the MCG a week or so ago for Victoria versus New South Wales. It featured top liners, several incumbents in the Test team, and obviously those who had played one day and also T20 for the nation. But there was that curious press conference on the second day when Smith, he'd lost his wicket. He'd been okay, but only made 3 runs from 29 balls. It was a case of who said what and when was what said. He was very keen, clearly, to put his foot forward in terms of what had happened in that discussion as to whether he would return to number 4. It's a really curious time for these champions, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And look, I mean, Kohli's arc has been remarkable in and of itself, but really he went through that long stretch where he didn't make an international century, certainly not a Test century, which I think ended in Ahmedabad last year. But the numbers are quite clear. He's not the player he was, and the Santner moment really exemplifies that. And look, this is a very conventional arc for a lot of greats. I mean, they have, as Crash has often said, they have these 3 or 4 outstanding seasons where they're up there with the gods, and then from there it's that you go back to being a mere mortal. The Smith storyline, though, this probably fascinates me just about more than any other, because it is Steve Smith, because he is quite arguably the best Australian batter we've seen since the Don. And this whole situation where he moved up to be opener, seemingly engineered significantly by himself. He planted the seed. The selectors and the coaches were happy enough to go along with his preference. And then the move back down, and then this sort of very gradual sort of softening of his position. Initially it was, I'm not phased where I bat. And then you saw some of the other guys coming out and saying that they hoped he moved back down, which itself was interesting. Was Khawaja being very strong on that front. That press conference that he did, he was very, very keen, clearly, as you touched on, Courtney, to get that position across that, he didn't, in his words, he didn't demand to move back down. He was asked what his preference was, and he said his preference was no longer to open the batting, it was to bat at 4, but that ultimately it would be, whatever the team wanted, whatever was in the best interest of the team. Now, clearly, it seems he's going to return to number 4. But, reading between the lines, you got the sense that he was not overly thrilled with the way George Bailey, that the selection chair, sort of unilaterally came out at that press conference the previous week when announcing that the Australia A squad and relayed that Smith's desire had been to bat down the order because he didn't have to do that, George. He wasn't actually asked directly about that to start with. And the whole politics and secrecy around who might have opened the batting if not for the Cameron Green injury, and how that all would have panned out has been a very interesting byproduct or side, side story in the lead up to this Test series. And really, to go back to the very start of our chat, that is really, it has added a lot of colour and flavour to the build up to this series, because there has been a genuinely interesting and compelling and live storyline, as opposed to some of the pantomime stories which sometimes become topical in the lead up to big Test series.
Look, speaking of GOATs, Nathan Lyon, clearly a champion off spinner, and he's signalled all the way through last summer that he's keen to continue on through to 2027, basically through to almost 40, which with Andrew McDonald extending his contract and some certainty and stability around the leadership, there's clearly a lot of faith in the Australian team as to who they've got out there in terms of the guys in their 30s. But the Lion versus the battery of Indian spin bowlers, it fascinates me as well. Now, we know that there's going to be a lot of reliance, obviously, on the Australian pace trio, whether they can get through the entire summer. Cummins, Hazelwood and Stark in the early 30s to mid-30s now. Shami being out is clearly an issue for India. Andrew McDonald made that clear today, thinking that Bumrah was, works so much better with Shami partner. But when we look at the spinners, Lyon, I think going back to the 2018-2019 series, he almost had the better. I think he took 21 wickets at 27 versus the 18 wickets at 25 for Jadeja, Ashwin and Kuldeep. But then in the most recent tour, clearly the Indians had the better. The 23 wickets at 27, Ashwin at the star, but very well supported by Jadeja and Sundar. Whereas Nathan only, 9 wickets at 55, played the 4 tests. It was a tricky one last time around for Nathan. That battle will be intriguing, and I'm sure it will go a long way to deciding whether or not Australia can win.
I often think with Nathan Lyon, the definitive quote came from Stuart Broad, where he said, every Ashes tour, it's the same with Lyon. We barely mention him at team meetings. We go, and of course, Lyon. And he said, I'm sick and tired of doing that. And then he ends up with 25 wickets at 28. He said, we always underestimate it. Now, India did for a while, but last time they turned up with a plan and it worked very well. It looked to me as if they were doing Bishan Beatty's old line with Lyon, as in, with the pitch of the ball, you either get as absolutely close to it as you can or as far away from it as you can. They use their feet really well, and he struggled. He struggled to break through. And by the end of it, you could tell he was quietly exasperated against the Indians. So what have they got this time? It'll be fascinating to see, because, Bharat Sundaresan, who's as good a judge of Indian cricket as there is, said, he said, look at what Mitchell Santner did to him. Yes, it was a turning deck, but he said, India against spin, they're not that great. They're not as great as people think they are. And I think maybe the Santner way, he's a good white ball bowler, Mitchell Santner. He hasn't done much in tests, but he bowled very straight to them and plugged their strengths. And I think we'll see a little bit of that from Nathan Lyon. He'll make them play a lot. He'll say, you miss, I'm going to hit. But it's a huge series for him. There's no question. Australia's got an ageing attack. It's a tight series. They will change the attack, and he's got to be the anchor man all the way through.